gaps and bridging those gaps, to look at the social climate of that particular time, to look at the economic climate of that particular time, but also look at the worldviews and what was happening at that particular time, because all of those influences nationally, internationally, socioeconomic and political conditions would have influenced the existence during that period. And by looking at that period, it would hopefully be possible for us to provide some understanding and rendering of how we moved from slavery to post-emancipation, as well as independence in terms of where we are today. But definitely looking at that, the climate of the country at that time. I suppose that would be the historical, the social contextual era.
But when you think women, because a long time to get a role that comes from the different factors, and if, you know, when you think of theory about how dominant women were during slavery, what happened in between?
Well, I think with reference to slavery, the fact is that during slavery, the Anglo-Saxon male was the dominant voice. That was the voice of reason. That was the voice determined by. And these were the views that white women themselves were under and actually followed. Coming out of slavery, though we may have been free, we still weren't free with reference to being able to make decisions for ourselves, because there were many conditions and underlying issues that allowed us to remain in bondage. And so I think it's important to revisit that again. And like I said, I suppose more information as it gets out would actually allow people to really embrace who we are. Because I suspect that the fact that we haven't embraced who we are has really allowed us to regress instead of progress. But by exploring and unearthing who we are in this rich historical past, then again, it is possible to build up that confidence. Because I think in terms of when social change comes about, it comes from grassroots, but it also comes about the ability to rise up. Lambs with lions, as persons usually say. And so by actually giving those lambs confidence, yes, we're actually able to become lions and realize that, oh, it was there all along. And we're actually able to move forward. But it definitely would require doing much more research and also sharing that information, I think, is important. And sharing that information as well, trying to implement social programs to actually embrace it and actually to support and actually put it forward. Because being able to just write it in a book is one thing, but actually being able to have persons become an integral part of it and buy into it would actually create the transformation. I think right now the information that we have is more transactional. We're researching it, we're publishing it, but we're not actually getting people to buy into it and to understand it. And then once people buy into something and understand, then we're not able to actually bring about transformation and change that we need. And that I think will actually provide that nexus between those periods of which you speak.
Here. Thank you. I'm hoping that you
1, 2, 3, 4.
I must applaud the presentation that was made. And I wanted to speak on two things, something that Dr. Ramos said, bridging that gap, particularly with respect to the power of the female slaves, and in particular, women, black women that were slaves. Also, what type of power did they have? And also, what was the power of miscegenation? I.e., getting together black women with white men, and what power did that actually put? I'm hoping that you would bring that out at some point also. But the question I wanted to ask you is simply, we know that slavery with all racial groups. We know white female slaves were the most prominent and highly prized of all female slaves, and they were Asian slaves. I've used that analysis to see what type of comparative analysis interpret or value, and that these people were brought to history for some.
Well, I'd like to, you mentioned several different things, and yes, one of them was the fact that there were black women who actually were slaves. And this again is something that is not new. Women in Africa, black women actually owned slaves in Africa, and again, from matriarchal societies. In those societies, they injected more men into the slave system. And when slavery started, I tend to think that most people tend to have a misunderstanding, because men who, especially Portuguese men, when they went to Africa, they actually took many black women for their beauty, not necessarily to actually have them as slaves. And there were actually many blacks who actually engaged in the process of transporting slaves. However, initially, like I said, slavery was expensive. And in order for it to become much more profitable, there had to become psychological disconnection, meaning that you are black. Because you are black, you are inferior. And those concepts actually developed and emerged a little bit more. So that, again, it changed the dynamics of slavery. And also, too, many people tend to think that if you are lighter skin or have a straight nose, then yes, perhaps there's some European ancestry there. But within Africa itself, there was slavery existed long before. So there were lighter skinned women in Africa. It wasn't just a matter of within the Western world because there was black and white. There were women, again, especially during along the coastal regions, because of mixing with North Africa, Southern Europe, also along the Middle East. So those persons were also interjected into the slave system as well. And with reference to lighter slaves, I did say that actually generated a high profit. And again, that is because the mode of convention became that if you are lighter or closer to European ancestry, then you are freer. And that is what research like this will hopefully redefine that particular assumption. And again, by doing that research, we can take away from the fact that it doesn't matter that yes, you may be a little bit darker, there is still beauty. And because of the psychological impact of slavery, and it was necessary to have slaves disconnect from themselves, these perceptions came about. Because collectively, slaves were more, they were more of them. But by bringing in the psychological impact that if you are host slave, you are better. If you are lighter, then you are better. What it creates a disconnect within the slave community itself. Together, we stand united, divided, we fall. So those were practices that were institutionalized to actually develop a system that actually became cheaper and more profitable. And if we actually could research and put that information up there, then people would see that the information that we have in our understanding of slavery, our understanding of black people, and our understanding of mixed race has actually been somewhat thwarted and passed down and transferred from generation to generation, have this perception of what it means to be black or what it means to be beautiful.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity, for creating the opportunity for us to have this discussion. I just wanted to clarify, this isn't my question, but I'd like a clarification based on something you just said, if I may, before I ask the question. Were you suggesting that, the tone, the range of skin color on the African continent prior to the transatlantic slave trade was because of the presence of Africans having a slave trade on the continent? My understanding was that, I think it's a false perception that everybody on the African continent is dark and very black. On the African continent itself, researchers have shown that melanin, which is what black means, one of the reasons black to be black, comes in different shades. So even on the African continent itself, you have a very wide range of skin tone. So I wasn't sure if you were suggesting that is how we got lighter skin black people in Africa.
No.
Okay.
Just to clarify that, well, most of what we know about Africa came from the Muslims and the fact that they actually traveled the region. And in their regions, they noted that there are different shades of black on the continent of Africa. Dark persons of African descent were found in southern parts of Africa. They noted that they were darker Negroes. And I think over the course of a period, we actually found in southern Africa more tribal leaders actually engaging in the slave trade more. And of course, we had a higher propensity of blacks actually coming into the system and being transported. But again, within the northern part of Africa, especially closer to Europe, and this is within any country where you have two different countries or ethnic groups that share the same water or land mass, you actually have a mixing of races and different shades. So within Africa itself, you had persons of different shades coming from northern Africa, coming from the eastern portion of Africa, especially along the coastal areas. Because prior to the Muslims and prior to Europeans going down into South Africa, we actually know a lot about them. Because again, geographical dispersion made it very difficult to travel. And so there were different shades, but again, the propensity meant that, again, greater amounts of darker Negroes came into the slave system. But within Africa itself, there were distinct individuals.
Thank you. My real question was on the use of the word slave. Did you ever contemplate whether or not to frame how we even discuss and think about a slave. Because I'm looking at them rather as enslaved person. Did you ever think about that and why did you choose this to go one way or another?
Well, with reference to slavery, slavery itself really owning somebody else. Enslaved would be more referring to actually forcefully injecting someone into the process of that system, because we do know that in Africa slavery was viewed differently from being viewed within the Western world. But for me, I continue to use the word slavery because I believe that the system, the word itself, is not as important as what the system itself meant. And
not the word slavery, the word like refer to a black woman, a black African woman that was in the Bahamas as a slave rather than as an enslaved woman, not necessarily as a slave.
well, from that perspective, then honestly, no, I'm not comfortable with the word slave. And I think within most of the responses that we see, that word from contemporary period is used as a slave. And I suppose it's just a matter of one's choice. For example, some persons prefer to make the word black a proper noun as well as others don't. But the essential meaning of the term is still there. It's one that I've seen used interchangeably, but for me, I'm comfortable with the word a slave as. So I guess it's just a matter of choice.
Good evening. First of all, a great presentation. I have two questions. First one, to what extent would the experience of enslavement for women be different in the urban environment of Nassau